Cambodia, a country worn by time and torn by war. For much of the last 3 decades, it's been off limits to just about all outsiders. Now, this mysterious land is beginning to open up, to share its secrets with the rest of the world. Many have remained hidden for hundreds of years, some even from Cambodians themselves. For the past couple of years, an elite team of scientists and archaeologists has been digging into Cambodia's past with stunning results. Now their inquiries will bring them here, to the dense jungles of Cambodia's southwest. Hidden away inside the crevices that run along these cliffs are caves full of jars. And in the jars, skeletons. Who put them here? Why are they hidden in one of the most impenetrable jungles on the planet? And most of all, who do they contain? For 600 years, the god kings of Angkor ruled over Cambodia's Khmer Empire. Their legacy includes some of the world's most beautiful works of art and architecture. The glory that was the Khmer Empire is best seen in the surviving temples and palaces of the ruined city of Angkor. At its height in the 13th century, Angkor had a population more than 30 times larger than Paris's at the time. But then, like other great civilizations before it, the Khmer Empire collapsed and nature reclaimed Angkor. For centuries, it remained hidden from view, lost within the tentacled superstructure of one of the world's densest jungles. And not only was the city lost, so were the people who for 600 years had ruled over the empire. And while it sounds unbelievable that they could just disappear, the fact remains, they did. But then Cambodia is a country where unbelievable events take place with a tragic regularity. The depth and beauty of its culture is matched only by the depth and enormity of its people's suffering. Since 1970, there's been 23 years of civil unrest, 10 years of foreign occupation, and in the middle of it all, 4 years of genocide, during which 1 in 5 Cambodians died. For Cambodia, 1975 was year 0, the end of history. Libraries were burned. Monasteries, the traditional repositories of information, were razed to the ground. In one fell swoop, much of the country's history was lost forever. Now, after decades of destruction and conflict, Cambodia is beginning to reclaim its soul. For Cambodians like radiologist and bone specialist Professor Reti Chem, rediscovering his country's history is part of the process of national healing.
I think if you put history of Cambodia in the modern context, let's say the last 3 decades, Cambodia went through so much political turmoil and the tragedy of the mass killing during the Khmer Rouge era. And much of the written sources has been destroyed or burned by the Khmer Rouge. So that's the reason why those bones are extremely important, because some aspect of the history are really written in those bones, and we have to learn how to decipher the message encoded in these bones.
And deciphering messages from bones is what's brought Reti here, to to a field far from the Cardamom Mountains and the body jars to examine the first ancient human remains ever found in what was the city of Angkor. For the past 2 years, a team of archaeologists and scientists has been painstakingly investigating this site. The excavations overseen by Dr. Christophe Potier. The analysis of the remains by Professor Ray-T Chem. Progress is slow, and at first glance the reward's meager. A shard of pottery, a fragment of bone. But every now and then, the team hits pay dirt. This is one of 3 intact skeletons found at the site so far.
And this one is really well preserved.
To many scientists and archaeologists, finding the first ancient human remains at one of the world's most celebrated archaeological sites would be sufficient reason for celebration. But to Ray-T, these bones have a deeper meaning. They represent his past.
Looking at bones is looking at a history of those people who started the Khmer civilization. And don't forget that I'm a Cambodian too, and for a bone radiologist, finding skeleton is just a, it's finding a treasure.
Ray-T heads up a loose-knit group of scientists and archaeologists known as the Osteoarchaeological Research Group, the ORG for short. The group's members come from the 4 corners of the world, but their work is centralized at the National University of Singapore. For the past 2 years, they've been analyzing the unique human remains from Angkor, but now they've got something else in their sights. 250 kilometers south of Angkor, hidden in jungles shrouded in mist, are jars full of bones. Some people believe they may contain the remains of royalty. If Ray-T and his colleagues can decipher the story coded into these bones, then they may find more than just another missing piece of Cambodia's lost history. They may discover the secret of what happened to the last rulers of Angkor. The Singapore skyline stands in stark contrast to downtown Phnom Penh. Cambodia is one of the world's 10 poorest nations, Singapore one of the 10 richest. This is the high-tech hub of Southeast Asia and a world leader in medical research. At the center of much of this research is the National University Hospital. It's here that the first ancient human remains ever found in the lost city of Angkor have come. And this is the core team that is slowly but surely piecing together the story written in the Angkor bones. The Osteoarchaeological Research Group. Kyle Latinas is an ecological anthropologist. He's responsible for preparing the bones and for helping interpret the meaning of any artifacts buried with them.
I use wooden tools as much as possible. Metal, unfortunately, leaves scratches and marks on the skeleton. Sometimes this might detract from certain important landmarks that forensic anthropologists and physical anthropologists will want to assess later.
Professor Eric Yap is the group's molecular geneticist. His specialty, isolating DNA and helping interpret the stories hidden in its genetic code.
With DNA, one can get a fingerprint of disease, a fingerprint of individuality, a fingerprint of one's history.
Professor John Miksic is an archaeologist specializing in Southeast Asian ceramics.
Well, ceramics are the archaeologist's best friend. It's one of the most indestructible materials there is. The problem is it has not been studied.
And heading up the team, Professor Ray-T Chem, paleoradiologist, amateur historian, and Cambodian.
Because of the war that happened for the last 30 years, every scholarly work has been interrupted. So you have the scholar from a certain generation has retired or just passed away, and there's a huge vacuum to be filled. And every time you do something, it's new, it's exciting, nothing has been written.
Ray-T and the ORG have adopted a unique approach to the examination of old bones. They leave them partially encased in the dirt in which they are found.
Well, you know, Reggie, this is getting closer to an archaeologist's dream of not having to excavate at all.
Then the bones in the dirt blocks are passed through a CAT scanner.
You can see the artifacts, the metal plate and the beads in their position, natural position, with respect to the skeleton.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Because
What the
once
team
you
is
do
after
that,
is a computer-generated 3D image of the bones, more or less as they would have been had they been left in the ground.
Quite literally, it actually gives us X-ray vision, which is nice to have in archaeology.
that
They
is
name the
unique,
skeleton
a
Bony
major
One,
trauma
in honor of
for
being the
the
first ever
femur
found
to
at
be
Angkor.
fractured like this. So we may guess if this individual may fall from a height, from a tree, for example, or from a
One of the
house,
first
steep
things they
house.
discover about Bony One
Oh,
is that
wild
he'd
animal
broken his
fighting or
leg.
running, but you need a major trauma in order to fracture the femur.
But it wasn't caused like a sword cut or something
No,
like that.
no, I don't
there's
think
no
so.
sign
no,
of
no,
a weapon used at all.
Yeah.
The
And-
fracture had
Yeah,
also
yes,
healed
a fracture
perfectly.
that has healed. And the other thing that we can infer from that is that by that time in ancient Cambodia, they were able to immobilize that fracture, so
Yeah.
make a splint. Yeah, make a splint in order to this fracture to heal.
How long would that take?
I think it take 3 to 6 months.
Well, what's interesting too is it really indicates that there was significant care of other individuals with injuries.
While the bones reveal something about the medical sophistication of early Cambodian society, the artifacts buried with them hint at something more personal.
It's impossible to do
Anthropologist Kyle Latinas thinks the person in the grave could have had a relatively high social status.
The long bones had a number of bangles, which I can't determine yet whether they're bronze or iron until I actually remove the soil. But the other plate that was an iron plate, which at that time would have been highly valuable, difficult to acquire.
To find that out
Archaeologist
later,
John
it's
Mixick
clean.
agrees. He also
But
believes
obviously,
the
for a
burial
child
practices to
of
be
this
unique.
age, to have so many artifacts with it suggests that they had very highly developed funeral customs as well. We don't have any examples of this kind of culture yet in Cambodia.
Carl Latinas handles the next stage, the cleaning of the bones.
There's no doubt about it. Dead men do tell tales. Whether they're 2,000 years old, 20,000 years old, 2 million years old, or 2 years old, they all have a story to tell.
And the story these bones tell is of greater interest than most. Cambodia is a country with little recorded history. Virtually nothing is known about the period in which Bony One lived.
This person is still speaking to me. Even though it's 2,000 years old, it's very much alive to me. So I treat it with as much respect as I can. Each one has a different personality. Each one speaks to you differently. Each one has a different set of mysteries and problems to try to resolve.
Archaeology as a science is only about 150 years old, and in that time its tools of trade have hardly changed, with a couple of exceptions. Most notably the use of DNA analysis as an investigative tool. Professor Yap, the ORG's molecular geneticist, helps answer the big questions.
Who are we? Where did we come from? And perhaps where are we heading?
In this case, he's hoping Bony One's DNA will help determine how Cambodia was settled.
Where did this skeleton originate from? Was it from an ethnic minority? Was it from a visiting trader from perhaps India or even further afield? Or was this from the local Khmer's, Cambodians resident in the place at that time?
But he's had his work cut out answering these questions. Getting DNA from the living is a relatively simple procedure, but once an organism dies, its DNA quickly degrades and fragments into ever smaller pieces.
The difficulty is extracting minute quantities of DNA from, you must remember, very highly degraded samples.
Especially when those samples have been buried for 2,000 years. But against the odds, Eric succeeded. After months of painstaking effort, he's managed to amplify the oldest human DNA ever isolated from Southeast Asian remains. The next step, to compare it with DNA from other Cambodian populations, past and present. Next stop, Phnom Penh, to try and find out just who's in the jars. At first glance, this is an ordinary place, but it isn't.